California Congresswoman Katie Hill. Congresswoman, thanks for coming on and welcome to Washington.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Quite a welcome.
It is. It's an interesting time to start.
You are saying something that not a lot of other people in your party are saying. You are saying that you would support some funding for some kind of physical barrier at the border. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two main points to consider. The first is that we can't talk about any of this until the government's open. My district has a huge number of federal employees. We have the Palmdale Regional Air Traffic Control Center, which controls all flights into Southern California, so you can imagine how busy that is. Mm-hmm. We have a federal prison that literally houses former terrorists, that prison guards are working without pay. They're essential personnel. We have so many federal employees, many of whom are law enforcement, that are still on the job, and they're law enforcement professionals. And so, to have this conversation about what border security should look like it has to open the government first.
So when you say you support some kind of physical barrier, what specifically are you talking about? Are you willing to put a dollar amount or any kind of just kind of hard data in terms of what you would support physically at the border?
Well, I think that's the challenge, right, is that we have to air this out in an open process. We need to hear from the experts on both sides. We have to hear from the sheriffs, for example, that work at the border. We have to hear from Border Patrol. We have to hear from, mayors from the towns that are actually right there on the border as to what they feel is needed. We know that there's already fencing and other physical barriers across the border in many different places, but there are gaps, and we need to find ways of filling those gaps, repairing the fencing. So I think that for many of us, there's not really doubt that some kind of physical barrier is necessary. I think the challenge is that we've gotten so hung up on these semantics, really on both sides, and gosh, I can't tell you how much I've come to hate the word wall. And I think many of us have, because it's unnecessary, right? Like in the campaign, President Trump was fixated on this wall, and I think we on the Democratic side of the aisle have such a gut reaction to it because it's associated with this sort of hateful rhetoric. But in reality, we need to step back, all of us, step back and say, okay, concrete wall 2,000 miles long, never going to happen. Bad idea. President has walked that back. Most Republicans have walked that back. But Democrats are for border security too, and we know that part of that does include physical barriers.
Do you wish that other Democrats would come forward and say, I would at least support some part of funding for some kind of barrier at the border? I mean, Speaker Pelosi has just said flat out, no, nothing, no dollars.
I think what she said is that we're not going to give any dollars to the wall. So again, this is a semantics issue more than anything else. And so what I'd like to see is all of us, again, taking a step back. We do need to really lay the groundwork, and I'm hoping that President Trump will come to the table on this, is that let's stop using federal workers' lives as a political pawn in this, and let's say, all right, we're going to open the government. Democrats want a lot too on this immigration debate. Regardless of the border security piece, we have this DACA issue that remains unresolved. We have these TPS recipients that are desperate. We have, we have real issues around immigration that we've been trying forever, and we have things we want to negotiate on. So let's open it. Then let's go to the table.
Do you agree with how your fellow California Congresswoman, Speaker Pelosi, do you agree with how she's been handling these negotiations?
I think she's in a very tough position. We are a huge tent conference, right? The Democratic caucus is massive, and our ideology runs the entire spectrum. So she's in a position where you have to represent that entire spectrum. And, remember, we're coming off of an election where the Republican side closed their argument with immigration with this fear around the caravan, and it didn't work. So I think we're in a place where the people who elected us are saying, don't give in on this. This is, this isn't what we elected you for. And so there's a place where we have to draw the line. But I think that again, that line that we're all consistent on as Democrats is that open the government first, then we'll talk. You will not get everyone happy on either side of the aisle with whatever solution we end up landing on.
You have described what President Trump is doing, his strategy here, as political terrorism. That's a very strong word. Do you stand by that?
I do, because the definition of terrorism is using fear and striking fear in the hearts of people to get a political end. And that's what's happening, right? Fear of missing a paycheck, which has now happened, fear of not being able to pay your bills, fear of missing critical services, fear of whether we're going to have plane crashes because we're missing on critical aviation personnel, fear on the southern border, Border Patrol agents aren't being paid. So I think that use of leverage is in a way inciting terror.
Well, and President Trump kind of counters that by saying, he believes that Democrats are the ones holding these furloughed federal employees hostage. So there's plenty of blame to go around and pointing of fingers, but now this is the longest shutdown in history. So endgame, how do you see this ending really quickly?
Endgame, I would say that to my Republican colleagues and even to Mr. Trump, we're here. Many of us are here, and we're ready to talk. But it's not, the first step is open this government, help the people who are struggling. Again, my district, I have a single mom, a veteran, an air traffic controller who is struggling. Open it, then let's talk.
All right, I got to leave it there, Congresswoman. But thank you for being one of the few congressmen and women and senators to actually stay in D.C. this weekend during the shutdown. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
No real hope of things changing in Washington. The record here of the partial government shutdown, now the longest in U.S. history. We'll bring in townhall.com senior columnist Kurt Schlichter to talk about it, and universal health care activist and elected delegate to the California Democratic Party, Ryan Skolnick. Gentlemen, nice to see you. We're out here in California. Everybody in Washington's talking about this, if they're not talking about the snow that's coming here, because they deal with snow in Washington about as well as you guys deal with rain out here. Kurt, anybody care about this?
Absolutely not. And in fact, those who do care are actively for a long shutdown. Look, I'm a conservative. I don't think that the government should be doing very much at all. And a lot of these people are simply not essential and shouldn't be doing anything. The longer the shutdown goes, the better. And at the end, I think Donald Trump's going to win.
Well, I think it was Ronald Reagan. I know it was Ronald Reagan who once joked about, calling for a government snow day, and whoever didn't show up was non-essential, therefore we don't need them. But Ryan, this brings up an important point. The Democrats are really putting all of their eggs in this basket of we must reopen the government. There can't be negotiations while the government is shut down. Does that really play well with anybody who's not a government employee?
Well, if you ask Pew, it plays very well because everything is showing right now that Donald Trump is losing right now, not the Democrats. The reason that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are so emboldened, because Lord knows they compromised too much before, they're emboldened because they see that the majority of Americans don't want a wall. They don't consider this a crisis.
Well, they don't want a wall, but they want border security.
It depends on what you mean by border security. Do they want vague, nebulous ideas of border security? Sure, it sounds great. But when you talk about concrete action, nobody wants it because if you look at the facts, and most people realize this, are starting to, immigration across the southern border illegally has been at a net negative for a few years now. So the entire idea that this is a crisis is kind of a myth, and more people are waking up to that. I don't think there's any rush to compromise right now.
This is a bet I want to take. I want to see who's going to win this, Leland. I want to see if border security is a winning argument as opposed to surrender.
Kurt, in 2018, at the end of the midterms, President Trump tried to turn it to an argument of border security, and Republicans lost 40-plus seats in the House.
Well, the Republicans in the House lost. A lot of those Republicans were big supporters of the agenda that President Trump embodies. President Trump came in with a specific promise. I'm going to secure the border. And as long
his
as
specific promise was, I'm going to build the wall and Mexico's going to pay for it.
Well, yes, and he's going to secure the border. And there are a lot of things that we need to do. But I agree. We need a concrete solution. Concrete in the form of a wall. And I think he's going to do it.
Ryan, you said that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi have compromised too much. We now have Lindsey Graham. He'll be on with Chris Wallace tomorrow. But he's been floating this idea of a grand bargain. He's been talking about it for a long time, of DACA for the wall and some type of path to citizenship for X number of billions. Is that a compromise you're okay with them making?
I mean, if you talk to certain politicians, I'm sure, but activists to the California Democratic Party like me, we have no interest in that because now what you're doing is you're...
Well, Republican activists have no interest in that either because they call it amnesty.
Exactly. Well, if you want to talk about, as a California Democratic Party delegate, what we see you doing by pushing this is weaponizing refugees and people seeking asylum against DACA recipients, which is simply immoral. Look, the reality is not only has immigration been from the southern border illegally been at a net negative, but a good number of the people who have been coming here are seeking asylum. They're not coming to try and break the law. They're trying to come and basically escape terrible situations, by the way, which if you go back to before World War I, the U.S. has been involved with creating. So the idea of a wall...
We've got it so far. Kurt, how do Republicans reframe this argument? Because over the next couple of weeks, we are going to continue to see soundbite after soundbite after soundbite of federal employees who can't buy groceries, who can't buy diapers, who can't pay their electricity bill. Already the wife of a Coast Guardsman was on here saying our rainy day fund ain't going to last that long. Republicans win by just keep saying no border wall funding, no government payments?
Well, look, I think government workers who are largely Democrats ought to consult with their Democrat representatives and agree, and tell them, agree to what the president promised. Right. Agree to border security. Agree to defending this country. And no DACA amnesty. If you are an illegal alien, go home. Right. There's my compromise. Obey the law.
Well, I think we just heard what the activists on both sides think about compromise on this one. We'll see if Washington can compromise. Normally they can compromise and agree to spend more money. So
well, yeah.
that happens all the time.
Gentlemen,
thanks a lot.